Rich people who married someone significantly poorer, what surprised you about their previous way of life? Viewer edition. You know, I didn't exactly grow up poor. My family had a decent amount of money because of my mom working and stepdad doing overtime all the time. But I did grow up the northern equivalent of redneck, and there were definitely some differences in the way I was raised and the people that I was with and their families. So I think I kind of get some of this stuff, but let's see what y'all had to say. Story 1. When I first started dating my wife, she would always say she wasn't hungry at dinner, and me, being a rather large biological male, could probably out-eat her and her 2 kids. After a month, she approached me to say I'd been great, but informed me that I cost more than her rent to feed, and she'd been skipping meals even prior to me because they couldn't afford to feed the 3 of them. I went to work the next day and requested overtime. Ended up working 80-plus hours that week, but when that check came through, I gave her $300 to spend at the dollar store, and then dropped $500-plus on a Sam's Club membership, plus all the food you could imagine in 2005. Needless to say, she's put on a couple pounds, but we are still together 17 years later. I mean, hey, you found a solution, you made things work, and you're still together all those years later. I say, thumbs up to you. That's awesome. I love starting on a nice, positive note about a couple that's been together, so good on y'all. And hey, we all gain a few pounds as the years go on. I mean, not me. I've just chiseled more and more into this Adonis, like, this wrinkly, decrepit human that I've become. I don't know. Story 2. This reminds me of a lesson I learned from my dad when I was little. We were in the car at night, and when we stopped at a traffic light, a lady walked up to our car window. She asked us for money so that she could get a bus ride home, and my dad gave her cash, and we went on our way. I was about 8 years old, and I asked him, well, what if she lied and spent it on something else, though? And he told me, with a lot of patience and love, that he wouldn't mind that, and he would rather give money to someone who was lying by accident than ever risk turning down someone who actually needed help. He told me that he can take the loss every now and then in order to make sure he never turns someone away when they really need his help. That changed my mindset and became a core belief for me, and I remember that night even now, and I'm 22. My dad's a great man. Hell yeah, your dad is a great man, and that's a really great lesson that I think a lot of us could learn from, in even on a grander scale for some stuff. There's always this talk of like, oh, this person that this homeless person on the street who's begging for money is probably just going to use that money for drugs. Maybe not. Maybe that's going to be the money that starts them down the right path and helps them out. You can't just judge based on things that you don't know. And yeah, maybe they will, but maybe it's awesome. So I think your dad is really smart, and I think more of us could stand to learn these lessons from him. Story 3. As an upper-class woman, I was always taught one thing: never fight over food because we're not starving. A few months after I started dating my boyfriend, I heard him fighting his sister over some snacks. I know it's common to fight over food, but hearing it happen after being told my whole life not to do it really shocked me. Story 4. So, funny story. I met a guy online and chatted with him on and off between 2006 to 2015. We started to become best friends, but I lived in pretty dire poverty. One year, I only made $3,000 for the entire year. Most months, I was lucky to make $250. My mom died of cancer. I was on my own, living in HUD housing on food stamps, going to churches to get clothing, etc. I was never homeless, and I kept my cost of living extremely low, but one day my friend was tired of me complaining about how bad my life was. Ooh boy. He told me he'd been so poor he was homeless on and off, digging in dumpsters for bottles and cans so he could buy 50-cent burritos. He'd often go hungry, and his mom was an addict, and they lived in a roach/bedbug-infested slum. Fast forward to today, we've been living together now for 7 years. We both have jobs and live comfortably. Still in HUD housing, though, so we're still technically poor, LOL. We're engaged, our fridge is packed with food, our clothes we bought, and we even got a Toyota Camry we paid for in 3 years with an auto loan. We both worked so hard to improve our lives together. We even bought our first washer and dryer a few months ago. Things can only keep moving up. I may be below the poverty line still, but I feel pretty rich. So, as I said in the beginning, I wasn't raised in poverty. My family, we definitely struggled from time to time and everything, but we were always taken care of. Now, when I became an adult, I made some bad financial decisions, and I guess I've worked a couple jobs. I don't know, no one's ever pointed that out to me, but I really scraped by for a lot of my life. I've lived below the poverty line and just barely made ends meet so many years of my life. And now I'm not, rich and wealthy or anything like that, but my partner and I are comfortable. We're quite comfortable, and it feels good to eventually get to that point, even if it is in my late 30s. And I'm glad to hear that you were able to do the same. I know it's not something that everyone can get, but I hope that everyone can eventually get to a spot where they can be comfortable and happy, because people deserve that. Story 5. Rich bachelor here, but I had a similar experience. In college, I'd hang out with a group of people from all walks of life, and one day we were out shopping. I'd proceed to go around shoveling everything I had any interest in into my cart. Meanwhile, two of my friends spent 5 to 10 minutes arguing about which salt to buy, the more expensive or the cheaper one. I often think of that day. It was my first step in realizing how different everyone's lives are. Story 6. I actually experienced both middle class and minor poverty growing up. When we were growing up, my dad was keeping our family alive on a teacher's income, and we made it by. We had a 2-bedroom house with 5 people living in it. Me and my 2 sisters all shared a room, and I slept on a mat on the floor. At the time, it didn't even seem that bad. I guess maybe for some people this was a blessing, but imagine a family of 5 living on about $700 to $800 a week. We went to stores and only got what we needed, and getting a snack, applesauce or granola bar, was like winning the lottery because our parents rarely let us for financial reasons. It was actually a really simple life in my opinion, so I really liked it. Then one day when I was about 9 to 10, my mom was able to get a job and my parents were making double what they were before. My dad also got several pay raises around that time, as he had gotten his 15-year pay raise. My family moved into a different house about 3 times the size. At the time, it seemed like a palace, and I guess it was pretty big. Suddenly, we started going to amusement parks about once a month instead of once every other year, and getting a snack became common. It was a really strange change for my family, and it taught us as kids to never ask for anything because we knew we couldn't afford it. Now we can afford it, but we still don't ask for stuff because I guess we still aren't used to it. Story 7. I was the poor guy dating a girl from a rich family. We didn't really connect as a couple, but we were more like great friends afterwards. Her family loved me and we often hung out even after we broke up. Memories of me getting paid taxi rides home drunk after some awesome dinner and fancy beers with them are dear to me. They are truly humble and honest people. She married, from what I've seen, a great man. Feels weird to have a feel-good end to a relationship. Story 8. My spouse thinks I have an eating disorder because I will sometimes not eat for 2 days. When he addressed it, I told him I was poor and the eldest sibling and sometimes didn't eat because my younger sibling, all from separate fathers, needed to eat first. Then he realized I mostly don't eat when his son comes over. It's not an eating disorder, I'm a chef. It's more of a childhood trauma disorder. Story 9. I'm the poor one dating a guy who has more money. I'm going to be honest and say that I actually really appreciate that I got to grow up poor, as it taught me a lot of lessons growing up and made me who I am today. One thing people don't tell you about dating richer men, though, is that watching their spending habits can be extremely stressful. If I'm honest, I'm worried about having kids with him if he's going to be used to this lifestyle and possibly, if we fall on hard times, leave our kids unprepared to deal with the circumstances. Materialism is a really scary thing. I gotta say, I don't think you're out of line for being worried about that, because people do end up falling on hard times and losing out on money and stuff. And if you make bad spending habits when you've got money, you might keep those bad spending habits when you don't have the money. So yeah, I think you're completely justified in feeling that way. And even though my partner and I, we make a comfortable living, as I've said, we still tend to be pretty careful with our money for the most part. Mostly. I did spend $100 to get some gross Michelle bananas, but it was a 20-year-long dream for me to get those things, and they were delicious. I made banana bread with the last ones. It was so good. Story 10. I dated a guy from a fairly well-off family in college. I jokingly told him he'd need to replace my cookies he was eating, about $4 to $5 for the bag, and he just casually pulled a $100 bill out of his wallet and asked if it was enough. I was so stunned that he just randomly had one on hand. I refused it, but it was still insane to me. Story 11. This reminds me of just how different my mom and my dad's families are. My mom is the daughter of the mayor of my hometown. My dad grew up having never met his own father, spent the first bit of his life living in a motel room with my grandma, who had him when she was about 18. My parents were together for about 12 years before they divorced, and it's always an interesting experience spending holidays between both of them because of how different the family experience is. Side note, the motel room my dad grew up in actually burnt down a few years back. That's actually how I heard the story the first time. My grandma would make him a bed out of the clothes in one of the dresser drawers when he was a baby as a sort of makeshift crib. Story 12. The food storing one touched me. Growing up, we were poor, and I remember seeing Mom crying multiple times because there was nothing to feed us and no money to buy food. I remember being given food parcels from members of the local church. Now as an adult, I hoard food. Not hoarders level hoarding, but I have about 2 months' supply of food in the garage for an emergency. It wasn't until I started therapy that I realized my overprotectiveness of my food stores was trauma-based and born out of fear of running out of food. Story 13. Mine is a generational tale. I'm Gen X, and my mom was the youngest of several children, so her parents were almost a full generation older than my dad's parents. They, Mom's parents, got married during the Great Depression. They lived in farm country, Ashland County, Ohio, and always said of the Depression that it didn't affect them that much. The main supporting point for this was we always had food to eat. But they raised frugality to an art form. They pretty much never threw anything away. They basically didn't believe in it. It goes without saying that they preferred to repair broken things rather than replace them. My mom gets twitchy about throwing away a broken small appliance, even though these days it would literally cost more to get it fixed than to replace it. When my grandparents turned on the hot water at the sink and wanted to let it run for a few seconds to get fully hot, they'd put a pitcher under it meanwhile to collect that lukewarm water and use it for things like watering houseplants. Bear in mind, this is in Ohio. Water shortages are not a thing in Ohio. They were just saving on the water bill at a fraction of a cent per gallon. Though that would be more in today's money because inflation. You're mostly paying for sewage treatment. When my mom was growing up, they lived on a farm and had effectively unlimited well water. They saved shoeboxes and wrapped the box and the lid separately so they could be reused year after year for Christmas presents. No need to buy any new wrapping paper for decades. When the family was going through their house to prepare it for the estate auction, some of the things that were found were just baffling. I mean, I'm a bit of a pack rat myself, but not like this. I don't want to give the impression that they were messy hoarders. Their house was very neat. Everything picked up and put away, no piles on the floor or anything like that. Even the kitchen counter was clean. But some of the stuff they kept was just odd. You know those weird single-piece thin flat plastic fasteners that sometimes come on the end of bread bags? Not twist ties, the other ones? I throw these away the first time I take them off and replace them with reusable twist ties. Grandma and Grandpa had a couple hundred of the things in a drawer and a whole bunch of saltine cracker sleeves, the ones made of the cloudy white plastic that almost looks like waxed paper but isn't. I asked my mom what possible use there could be for used saltine cracker sleeves, and she said they could be used for putting leftovers away in the fridge. Bear in mind, these people had Tupperware, actual name brand Tupperware, the good stuff with a lifetime guarantee, for at least the last 40 years of their life. But they still saved the saltine cracker sleeves because you never know when something like that'll come in handy, I guess. As you'd expect if you can do basic arithmetic, they both passed away a couple of decades ago now. Separately, about a year apart from one another. They'd been married for more than 60 years when Grandma died. So you're Gen X, I'm a millennial and everything. We're fairly close. Whatever. No, I grew up with, not my grandparents, but my parents still held on to a lot of this mentality. I remember times in our life where we were washing out Ziploc bags, and I'd like go into the kitchen and they'd be around the drying rack around the dishes because don't want to waste those Ziploc bags. And, Cool Whip containers. Anyone else out there? Does that immediately invoke the idea of a cupboard full of Cool Whip containers that you would then use for leftovers and stuff? Because I still do that. If I get empty peanut butter jars or empty Cool Whip containers, stuff like that, I am still saving them for storing food and stuff. I don't need to. I have a 100-piece set of nice deli containers. Nice. They're deli plastics, the little plastic, whatever, So I get this mentality. I still do hang on to those things. And they do come in handy if we have guests and I want to send them home with food because, hey, keep the Cool Whip container. I won't miss it. Story 14. My cousin always had a slightly wealthier family than me. They'd never had to sit down and talk about how he couldn't ask for things at the store, a regular conversation for my family, etc. Now that my family is in a better financial state, he tends to think I'll spend whatever amount of money I have while we're at the mall, and I don't. I physically have to fight myself to buy something I want, and my cousin gets so annoyed with it sometimes. I fight myself to buy a $2 backpack pin or something like that. I've gotten better at treating myself, but I'm still conservative about my money. Story 15. Growing up in upper middle class in Europe, I never had issues or saw my parents have issues with bills. I started dating someone from the US. She was very poor. My girlfriend couldn't even afford schooling and lived in pretty bad conditions. There have been many instances where I've been shocked at the way they live, but also a certain financial decisions that were made where I even said that's just throwing money in the fire. Example, they bought a new TV with their stimulus check while they didn't even have a bicycle, let alone a car, while the nearest store was 2 miles out. They always walked. Example, they adopted a third dog while they could barely afford food themselves, having to pay for the dog food now while not being able to afford their own food. There are many other instances where I just straight up didn't agree with choices they made. It's still adjusting, but the relationship is beautiful. I learn a lot from her, and she sees that life can be more than just misery. She got her own job a couple months ago. And while still struggling, she now finally has the ability to go to the movies, go skating, or buy some nice food she likes. Story 16. I am lower class, but grew up in a small country town, so I thought I was rich growing up. My girlfriend grew up middle class in the city and went to a private school, so she thought she was poor growing up. There have been a few moments. The one that stuck with me the most was when I was telling her a story about my childhood and she just started hugging me. I was a bit confused, but she just said how sorry she was and wouldn't let go. Been together for 3 years now, and I swear I will marry her one day. Story 17. I once dated a rich guy, and it didn't take me long to realize how disconnected he was from reality. One time he came to complain to me how once he graduated, his parents were going to give him only $100,000 a year. As he was frustrated and looking for sympathy, I had to explain to him how my sister and her family of 5 only made $25,000 a year. His parents were only going to give him $100,000 a year. Oh, the poor dear, however shall he make it by? What? You're an adult, and why? Rich kids, I feel bad for you because you're given such a skewed perception on reality. I was going to say what happens when your parents are gone, but I'm sure you get an inheritance and, oh man, rich people, they confuse me and make me feel not happy. Story 18. My dad grew up very poor. Even to this day, he eats table scraps as a delicacy despite not needing to. It used to really bother me until my mom explained how he grew up not eating at all. All the more eternally grateful for how he always made sure me and my siblings were well fed and always had everything he didn't. Not that I wasn't already grateful, it just explained the gross behavior that I never understood. Old habits die hard, as they say. Story 19. Not married, but have dated girls from all walks of life. The level of pickiness is the main difference that sticks out to me about dating a girl from a wealthy family versus a girl from a poor one. Not all, but most of the wealthier ones could not let something go without comment or fuss if it didn't measure up precisely to what they were used to. Story 20. My dad came from a better upbringing than my mom money-wise. My mom lived in a 3-bedroom household of 8 people and in a semi-deserted place, so she always focused on saving water. So growing up with my mom being more present, me and my sis picked up on her frugality, and it drives my father insane. My dad buys unnecessary amounts of fresh food that obviously spoil before we have a chance of eating it all, and we can't comment on anything on display at a shop because he'll insist on buying it for us. My partner isn't poorer or richer than me. Our families just have different spending priorities. The big difference is that I was taught to save water and he grew up in a very humid place. I'm baffled at how he and his family just waste it like it's nothing, how they can use it to clean everything instead of trying to dry clean it first, like with a broom, a rake, a rag, etc. He never even considered that the shower doesn't have to stay on the whole time he's washing himself. He saw me turning the water off while I applied conditioner and was completely speechless. Another habit I have is to leave the biggest dirty dish at the bottom of the sink, so as I wash the dishes, the water accumulates in it. I use it to submerge dirty dishes and make it easier to remove dry dirt. Even after I soap it up and rinse it with clean water, he can't get over how disgusting it is.
Oh, saving on water. So I grew up in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes. So we were never short on water. And I grew up outside of city limits, and we had well water, so water was just free. And when I moved, I guess it'd be like 8 years ago now, to Nevada, and I lived out there for a few years, like watching your water use and droughts and stuff were a real thing. And so I did have to learn to be a little more conscientious about that. My dogs are barking because I think my Ninja Creamy has arrived. Oh my gosh!
Story 21. In my young life, my family was firmly middle-class living in an affluent neighborhood. Due to my stepmom's gambling problem, we could barely afford a tiny house for several years before my dad clawed back into the lower middle class, which is how I spent my teen years. I'm incredibly high income at 40. My wife grew up with no food and makes more than me. We both have mixed feelings about things. I'm more extravagant on single purchases and services, but she outspends me by sheer quantity of purchases. Neither of us do things like waste food or take for granted how amazing our lives are now. In any case, we are the poor people in our friend group. Everyone grew up in families where college was a thing that you did. People had big boats, weekend sports cars, and traveled the world as children. The strange thing is to be what most people think of as rich and still be the broken ones. Story 22. To be fair on Story 25, her parents could have really wanted him to come because they wanted him to ask her out. My parents at the time were not doing as well as they are now and got jobs in an extremely nice college prep school, like college tuition is expensive, specifically so that me and my siblings got to go for free and get an amazing education. The girl I took to prom had a thing for me at the time, and her parents paid for literally everything, which I found out later was because they really liked me and my parents and wanted me to just ask her out on a date that wasn't prom because she talked to her mom about how she was too shy. They even talked to my parents about how, if it worked out, how they travel a lot and would love to take me on vacations. They weren't even doing it as an advertising their wealth kind of way. They were just genuinely nice doctors who had plenty of cash to throw around and were good enough with finances to always be able to do extravagant things. In hindsight, as someone that has had to make enough to pay rent, those costs were definitely not cheap, especially when a week or so after they went on almost 2-week-long safari trip at a resort in South Africa as a family of 4. Story 23. I grew up really poor and dated a woman who grew up very, very wealthy. She was and still is always impressed at my cooking skills. I can make a meal out of almost anything I can find in the cupboards. She can't cook at all. She really enjoys homemade food as opposed to a restaurant/takeout every night and leftovers for breakfast or lunch the next day.
Yeah, learning how to just make whatever you can out of food in the cupboard, that is a skill that I learned throughout my 20s, because there were so many times where I would like look through my kitchen. Payday was still, 3 days away, and I had all of, 2 cents in my bank account. And it's like, all right, what do I got? I got some spaghetti noodles. Let's see, some black olives. I got a little bit of ground beef, taco mix. Let's make taco pasta. It was delicious. And yeah, I still stick with that. I can make a lot of stuff out of leftovers and out of the pantry, and it's a great skill because I'm a friggin' good cook. Learn to cook, folks.
Story 24. I didn't grow up rich, but comfortably middle class. My significant other grew up extremely poor and in a family with lots of kids. I was shocked by many things that they told me about their childhood. For example, one time mom took all the kids out and kept making excuses not to go home and was driving all over till late at night. She did not want to break the news that they had been evicted once again. I was also shocked that the kids always kept jugs of water in the fridge because the utilities often went unpaid. Or that they ate one food for months at a time, usually ramen. Things like this were never a worry during my childhood. Story 25. My ex is the only son of a millionaire, and the biggest shock was how self-assured he is in every aspect of his life. He looks pretty average, wears clothes that look plain but cost a lot, and absolutely oozes confidence. He never paid his own rent or had to worry about it, never once had a job when we were dating. He asked his dad for a really expensive camera, took up photography as a hobby, and got pretty good. Now he makes a fair bit of money doing that. Just breezes through life. It's surprising how magnetic that kind of person is. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.